The first morning on my new farm, I stood at the edge of my 5-acre property, inhaling the crisp, earthy air. After 15 years of working as an agricultural scientist, carefully saving every penny, this land was my reward, a place where I could finally live off the earth, grow the best organic produce, and supply fresh food to local markets. But 3 months later, my dream turned into a nightmare. I woke up to the sound of laughter outside my window. I pulled back the curtain and my breath hitched. A group of strangers, adults and children, were wandering freely through my farm. A little boy chased my chickens while his mother snapped photos. A man in a golf shirt plucked a ripe tomato from my vine and took a bite as if he were at a grocery store sampling station. Heart pounding, I threw on my boots and stormed outside. "Excuse me," I called out, forcing my voice to stay even. "This is private property. What are you all doing here?" A woman, holding a basket already filled with MY vegetables, looked at me confused. "The sign says this is the Willow Creek Estates Community Farm and Zoo. It's open to all residents." My stomach dropped. "What sign?" She pointed toward the entrance. There, standing boldly at the edge of my property, was a freshly installed wooden sign with elegant script. Willow Creek Community Farm and Zoo. Open daily 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., a family-friendly experience. I hadn't put that sign up. I didn't even remember walking over, only that my legs moved on their own, fueled by disbelief and growing rage. I yanked the sign out of the ground, gripping the wooden post so tightly my fingers ached. "Who put this here?" The woman frowned. "Diane Thompson from the HOA. She announced at last week's meeting that you were excited to share your farm with everyone." Diane Thompson. I'd only met her once, on moving day, when she stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching me unload crates of gardening supplies. She had wrinkled her nose and made a single cutting remark. "I just hope this setup doesn't ruin the neighborhood aesthetic." And now, she had declared my farm public property? I turned back to the strangers still picking through my crops. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to stay polite, "but you've been misled. This is my private home, not a public attraction." The family looked embarrassed and shuffled away, but not before the woman mumbled. "Diane said you'd be happy to teach the kids about farming." Happy? I was about to find out just how deep this scheme went. That evening, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Diane Thompson standing on my porch in a crisp pantsuit, her hair perfectly styled, her expression an unreadable mask. Behind her were 2 men I recognized from the HOA welcome packet, Malcolm Jenkins, the HOA president, and another board member whose name I couldn't remember. I opened the door, but before I could speak, Diane's polished voice rang out. "We noticed you removed our community sign." I crossed my arms. That sign falsely labeled my private property as a public space. I never agreed to that. Diane's smile was tight and cold. "When you purchased in Willow Creek, you agreed to all HOA covenants. Section 12.3 states that unique landscape features visible from common areas can be designated as community enhancement zones." My stomach clenched. Malcolm stepped forward. "We've also received complaints about unsightly structures and livestock odors. Designating this as a community educational space actually helps you avoid fines." Fines? I felt heat creep up my neck. First, my farm is legally permitted under county regulations. Second, nothing in your bylaws allows you to grant public access to private property without the owner's consent. I'll be happy to show you the relevant property laws. Diane's smile vanished. "We've made our decision. The sign goes back up tomorrow, where you'll be fined $200 per day for each violation." She shoved a folder into my hands, thick with fabricated violations. "Oh," she added, "we've already advertised a farm experience in the community newsletter. 40 families have signed up for tours this weekend. Don't disappoint the children." And just like that, they turned and left. Before I could argue, before I could process the sheer audacity of what had just happened, that night, I sat at my kitchen table, reading through every document I owned. They thought they had power. They had no idea who they were messing with. The next morning, the first car arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Then another, and another. By mid-morning, dozens of families stood in my driveway, expecting a guided tour. Children ran toward my chicken coop. Parents smiled, holding out donation money. A woman with twins approached me. The newsletter said you'd be showing the kids how to collect eggs. We already paid our HOA activity fee. My blood ran cold. Diane collected $15 per family for the farm experience. The woman nodded, looking concerned. 40 families, $15 per family. That was $600 the HOA had collected, without my knowledge or consent. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry, but there's been a misunderstanding. This is private property. The HOA had no right to sell tickets. The woman frowned. Diane runs the HOA like a kingdom. No one dares challenge her. That's when I knew I wasn't just fighting for my farm. I was fighting against a power-hungry dictator. That afternoon, I took a quiet drive through the neighborhood and started taking photos. Diane's house? Her backyard shed violated HOA rules. Malcolm's property? His fence was the wrong color. The third board member? They had unapproved modifications. Knowledge is power. And I was gathering ammunition. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Diane was already there. Behind her, 2 HOA workers were reinstalling the sign. Remove that sign from my property, I said, voice steady. Diane smirked. The HOA has voted to designate this as a community resource. Section 15.2 gives us that authority. I folded my arms. I've read Section 15.2. It applies only to common areas and requires owner consent. Malcolm scoffed. We have community needs that supersede your personal preferences. Diane stepped closer, voice low. The sign stays. The tours continue. Fight us, and we'll make your life very difficult. I stared at her, letting her words sink in. They thought I was some naive farmer. What they didn't know, I controlled the food supply for every grocery store and restaurant they depended on. And tomorrow, I'd make sure they never forgot it. The next morning, I woke up early, but not to tend to my crops. I had a bigger mission. I drove straight to Wilson's Market, the largest grocery store in town, where I supplied nearly 60% of their fresh vegetables. The store's owner, Mr. Wilson, was stacking a display of tomatoes when he spotted me. "Ah, there's my star supplier," he called out. "Your rainbow carrots sold out in 2 hours yesterday. Got another batch." Before I could answer, I overheard 2 women chatting nearby, holding bundles of my tomatoes. I swear, I've never tasted anything this fresh before. One said, "I know, right? I wish all produce tasted like this." The other agreed. They had no idea the vegetables they were raving about came from the eyesore farm their HOA wanted to destroy. I turned back to Mr. Wilson. "Actually, I may have trouble meeting our contract next month." His smile faded. "What? Why?" "Some folks from the Willow Creek HOA are causing problems with my farm," I said, making sure my voice carried. "I may need to pause deliveries." The women froze and slowly turned toward me. Recognition dawned on their faces. "Wait," one of them approached cautiously. "Are you saying you grow the produce for Wilson's Market?" I nodded. "And for Harvest Table Restaurant and Morton's Grocery." Her eyes widened. "Diane never mentioned that. She told us your farm was just a messy little hobby." "Interesting," I said, tilting my head. "Did she also mention that she's been charging families $15 per person for unauthorized tours of my property?" Their shocked expressions told me everything I needed to know. They hurried off, already dialing their phones. And just like that, word started spreading. By the time I got home, another HOA-led tour was underway. But this time I was prepared. A teenage girl, who I had never met, was standing in my yard, leading a group of families around my property. "The farm lady will even let you hold the chickens for an extra $5, she chirped. I stepped forward. "Absolutely not." The girl jumped, startled. "Oh, but Mrs. Thompson hired me to give tours while she's at her salon appointment." She held up an official-looking badge that read, "Willow Creek Estates Community Guide." I took a picture of the badge. "This is trespassing. I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff." The tour group quickly scattered. Just then, an elderly man stepped forward. "I'm Gerald Matthews. He introduced himself. Lived here 30 years, since before Willow Creek was even developed. Been watching the situation with interest. I shook his hand, curiosity piqued. Nice to meet you, Gerald. What do you mean, before it was developed? He leaned on his cane. Diane and her husband Michael have been grabbing power in this community for years. But what you really need to know is this. They're planning to develop the green space behind your farm into condos. My stomach dropped. That's why they're pushing you out, he continued. If they get your land, they can connect the parcels and sell the whole thing for millions. Everything clicked into place. Diane didn't care about community enhancement. She cared about money and control. But I had one advantage she didn't know about yet. Begins to unravel. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office to dig up zoning laws. What I found, gold, Willow Creek Estates, including my farm, was designated as a protected agricultural heritage zone. That meant Diane's development plans? Impossible. Unless, of course, she forced me out first. By the time I returned home, I saw Diane and Michael standing on my land, watching as surveyors hammered metal stakes into my soil. They were marking my farm for construction. I marched straight over. Stop immediately. I ordered. You have no right to build anything on my property. Michael, ever the businessman, gave me his signature fake developer smile. We're just installing some simple pathways, he said smoothly. The board approved it yesterday for visitor safety. I held up my phone, recording everything. You do realize, I said, that this land is legally protected farmland? Any attempt to develop, it would require special permits and public hearings. Michael's smile slipped. That's not possible. I smirked. It is, and I have the county documents to prove it. Diane's phone rang. She answered it, her expression shifting from annoyance to panic. What do you mean we have no produce for tonight's dinner service? She hissed. Call our backup supplier. A pause. Then her face drained of color. What do you mean they can't deliver either? Oh, how unfortunate. Michael turned back to me. You did this on purpose, didn't you? I shrugged. I simply paused deliveries to review my contracts. Funny how your restaurant relies on my eyesore farm to stay in business. Diane hung up the phone. We have 52 reservations tonight. What do you expect us to do? I crossed my arms. I suggest you start being a lot nicer to your local farmer. The next morning, I met Gerald at the old oak tree that bordered my property. He held a worn leather folder in his hands. I couldn't sleep after that meeting, he said. I need you to see something. He opened the folder and pulled out yellowed legal documents. This land belonged to my family, he explained. When Willow Creek was developed, the original HOA covenant included a special clause, one that protects agricultural land from HOA interference. I scanned the faded legal language. Agricultural pursuits are to be recognized as historic land use and shall not be impeded by any current or future HOA regulations. Legally binding, ironclad. Diane and Michael had been hiding it for years. They tried to bury this, Gerald said, but they couldn't legally erase it. That means they have no authority over my farm. I finished. For the first time in weeks, I grinned. Diane had played her last card, and I was about to win the game. That evening, Michael showed up at my door. His confident swagger was gone. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly messy. Can we talk? He asked. I let him in, but I remained standing. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, Diane gets carried away. I'm here to make things right. He slid a glossy folder across my table. The Willow Creek Farm Collective. You keep full ownership of your property, he explained. We market it as a community asset. Residents can subscribe to weekly produce boxes. The restaurant gets priority supply. Everyone wins. And in exchange? I asked. You agree to our terms, he said. I flipped through the contract, scanning the fine print. And then there it was. Grand Terre agrees to transfer developmental rights of 60% of property to Willow Creek HOA after 24 months. I closed the folder. Michael, I said, my voice calm, who tries to hide a land grab in fine print? His face paled. This meeting is over. And as I escorted him out the door, I knew the war wasn't over. It was just getting started. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Michael's sudden offer didn't sit right with me. Diane and her husband weren't the type to give up so easily. At 2 a.m., a strange noise jerked me awake. Rustling, footsteps, a metallic snap. I grabbed my flashlight and stormed outside, just in time to see the gate to my chicken coop swinging open. All 20 of my hens were loose. My heart pounded as I scanned the darkness. Then movement. A shadow darted behind my neighbor's hedge. I sprinted forward, shining my light. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of someone's expensive designer coat, and embroidered on the dropped wire cutters lying in the grass, DT. Diane Thompson. Oh, she was getting desperate, but she had just made a huge mistake. Before it's too late, at sunrise, I arrived at the HOA community meeting. This time, I wasn't alone. I had invited local business owners, reporters, and even a few county officials. The moment I walked in, Diane's face twisted with fake concern. Our local farmer has arrived, she announced smugly. I hope you're ready to work with us for the good of the community. I smiled. I sure am. Let's start by discussing how you've been stealing money from residents by charging for unauthorized farm tours. Gasps rippled through the room. Diane's smile froze. That's a misunderstanding. I raised a folder packed with evidence. I also have records showing that your so-called community farm has no legal basis. My property is protected under county agricultural laws. Silence. I slapped down another document. And this, I said, looking straight at Diane, is proof that your husband's restaurant has been entirely dependent on my farm's produce, which, by the way, they're no longer receiving. Malcolm, the HOA president, went pale. Wait, you're the supplier for Harvest Table? Not anymore, I said. I put a pause on deliveries. I figured you'd all be fine eating from big box grocery chains instead. The business owners and crowd, restaurant owners, caterers, market vendors, erupted in protest. This is ridiculous, one shouted. I've already had customers cancel because our menu changed, another yelled. I folded my arms. Diane wants control over my land? Fine, but she better explain to this entire community why their favorite restaurants are now in crisis. Diane looked ready to explode, but she wasn't ready for what happened next. One by one, neighbors began standing up. First was Jacob, the bakery owner. I had no idea my bread was made with flour from your farm. That's the best part of my business. Then Jessica, from Morton's Grocery. Diane, you knew all along that this farm supplied us. You let this happen. Even people who had originally supported the HOA now looked uneasy. Diane's house of lies was collapsing. She shot to her feet. We're talking about proper community standards, not vegetables. I arched an eyebrow. No, Diane, we're talking about how your greed almost destroyed the entire town's food supply. That's when Gerald, the elderly neighbor who had lived there before Willow Creek existed, stood up. He held up a leather folder for all to see. This, he announced, is the original HOA covenant. It explicitly states that agricultural land in this community is protected. Diane and Michael knew this, and they tried to bury it. Diane staggered back, her face going pale. And just like that, her reign was over. The next day, Michael showed up at my door. This time, he looked exhausted. Can we talk? He asked. I let him inside, but I didn't offer him a seat. I'm here to apologize, he admitted, rubbing his temples. Diane went too far. I won't defend her actions. I didn't say anything. He sighed. The truth is, we underestimated you. We thought you were just some what? I asked. Some farmer? Someone you could bully out of their land. Michael looked away. Look, I'm here because my restaurant is in crisis. We need your produce. I'm willing to make a fair business arrangement. I leaned against the counter. And what about Diane? His jaw tightened. She's stepping down from the HOA. Effective immediately. I let that sink in. Diane was gone. I finally exhaled. Michael, I said, dead serious. You and I both know that I hold all the power now. If I choose not to work with your restaurant, your business folds. If I choose to never supply this community again, prices will skyrocket overnight. Michael swallowed hard. I get it. You win. I extended my hand. Then we'll do business properly. No loopholes, no hidden clauses, and no more games. Michael shook my hand, and just like that, the war was over. 3 days later, I stood on my front porch, drinking coffee. For the first time in months, my farm was finally my own again. Diane, completely humiliated. She had officially resigned from the HOA, and her influence over the town vanished overnight. The community farm and zoo sign, ripped out and burned. And the best part? The same people who once looked down on my farm were now coming to me with gratitude. One morning, a woman in designer yoga clothes, who had once wrinkled her nose at my chickens, showed up at my doorstep holding a homemade pie. I just wanted to thank you for those amazing heirloom tomatoes at Greenleaf Market, she said sheepishly. I had no idea they came from your farm. My kids would love to learn how you grow them. I smiled. Diane had spent so much time trying to ruin me, but in the end, she had only made me stronger. As the woman turned to leave, Gerald appeared beside me, chuckling. Look at you, he said. The same folks who called your farm an eyesore now want to learn from you. I laughed. Guess they realize what really matters. Gerald nodded. People like Diane, they think power is about control. But real power, it's about what you give others. And as I watched another car pull up, this time, a local chef looking to place an order, I realized Gerald was right. Diane had fought to steal from me, but I had fought to build something lasting. And in the end, I won. The end.